Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. We finally got the uniforms for Ultron and Thanos, and I have to say, even though Ultron's uniform isn't really what we expected, since we kind of hoped that it was a native tier 3 kind of uniform, it's actually really good for its cost, and you'll see that in the next video where I test him fully in that one. But this video is specifically for Thanos, and I have to say that in PvP, the king is back. As soon as the uniform dropped, I was able to max it out, and I was also lucky enough to get his artifact at 4 stars with the proper instinct and a pretty good passive. Funny enough, I was also able to craft a brilliant CTP of regen, which I equipped after I finished my testing, so the testing that you will see will be primarily with a mighty CTP of regen, not a brilliant one. So a brilliant one should take him even further than what you see. I'll also cover the testing that I did between a CTP of authority and regen, so you get an idea of which one you might want to pick depending on which type of PvP that you do, or in what situations it might be better to have one compared to the other. One thing that's interesting about Thanos' new uniform is that his third skill now has 3 possible animations to it, even though from what I have seen the effects are exactly the same for each option that could pop out. So what I mean by that is that every time that you use the third skill, you can either have Supergiant come out, Ebony Maw, or Black Dwarf. If you paid close attention to the first part of this clip, you'll see that every single one of them have the same number of hits, with the exception of Black Dwarf, but it could possibly be that he missed some hits. So all 3 of the characters should have roughly around 23 hits to a particular enemy each. Outside of that, I haven't really seen anything different between the 3 animations that play, so there isn't really any secret kind of super armor penetration or bigger AoE from what I've seen. It seems to be pretty much all the same. I also noticed that in the patch notes, the ultimate was mentioned to have changes. And from the testing that I did, the number of hits between the 2 skills was pretty much exactly the same. The old T3 had 49 hits and the new one had 50 hits, or 1 more. So really the only difference is that the base damage on the skill is much higher now. Before I look at the PvP testing for the character, which is what I'm guessing what most people want to see, I'm just going to quickly look at how much better his base damage got with his new uniform. Again, all my testing is done with a mighty CTP of regeneration, though at this point I did have that artifact equipped that gave me instinct, crit, and crit damage, as well as ignore dodge. With the old uniform, I complete stage 60 of Thanos World Boss with 2 minutes and 18 seconds remaining. If you're dead set on using Thanos for PvE, even with his kit being so good for PvP, you could try out a CTP of Rage because of the low cooldown and the frequent number of skills that you could spam on top of one another, but he doesn't have that guaranteed crit rate in his kit, so you could potentially even run a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction, because the 3rd and the 5th skill can be instant cancelled and you can try proccing on the 4th skill. Aside from that, the ultimate skill now hits a lot harder, and ideally you do not want to cancel out of it if you have a single skill damage proc. You can see that with the new uniform, I have a clear time improvement of about a minute, finishing with 3 minutes and 8 seconds remaining. Also, don't forget that Thanos requires physical Urus or physical Odins, but his type damage is energy when it comes out, so you can use him, or should use him, against Cull Obsidian. And you can see that with the old uniform, it took me 2 minutes and 37 seconds to clear stage 99 of him. With the new uniform, I finish about 40 seconds faster, but that's likely due to the way that I played, since I should be able to complete him a little bit quicker, because the old uniform had a max cap of 30% all defense down that ignores immunity, and the new uniform has 60% all defense down that ignores immunity. Nevertheless, even with a slightly slower clear time, I still finish faster than the Thanos clear because of that all defense down. Again with the old uniform, but this time versus World Boss Legend Knull at stage 9, I'm able to complete the fight with 30 seconds remaining. Keep in mind that I only have 1 damage leadership for this test and no supports. With the new uniform, I finish about 1 minute faster, which is consistent with the results that I got with the other world bosses. If you're wondering what kind of rotation I was using, the one that I went with was 3 cancel, 5 cancel, 1 slight delay cancel, 4. And then you use the second as filler till your skills are back off cooldown. If you have a single skill damage proc, you would likely not use that one skill mixed in there because the delay cancel might kind of screw up your proc. Then once you have your ultimate available to you, the rotation that you can use is 3 cancel, 5 cancel, 6, and then just stay in your ultimate till it's done. Or if you want to try to squeeze out a little bit more damage at the cost of maybe losing your proc, you could do 1 delay cancel, 3 cancel, 5 cancel, 6. As a quick note, you delay cancel the one after you see him go into iframe and have a little bit of forward movement. You can potentially cancel it when he just goes into his iframe, but you will lose some of those additional beams of damage. Funny enough, I didn't actually use this rotation when I was doing my testing because I forgot that the ultimate skill was buffed, but if I did, I'm pretty sure that my clear time would have been improved by several seconds, maybe 20 seconds or more. I noticed that if you cancel the ultimate and go into your 4th skill, you pretty much lose about a bar to a bar and a half, as opposed to if you just canceled the 3rd and 5th and just stayed in the 6th skill. I did also take him into ABX, but he doesn't have paralysis for the season, so I only played up to the 2 minute mark to get an idea of the damage that he did, which without a proc isn't really that great, but he did end up scoring about the 1.4 to 1.5 range, which means that if you times that by 3, since it's 3 minutes, you should get about 4 to 4.5 million worth of damage without a proc, which is actually pretty solid. With a proc, that means that he should be able to get somewhere in the 8 million to 9.5 million range, I would guess, with a CPP of Rage at the very least. He could be able to push past 9 to 9.5 million if you have a totally maxed out build, a very good rotation, and really good procs. But that's kind of speculation on my part, and I don't really think that most people will use him for ABX, considering there are so many better options. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the video that I did deck out Thanos. I already had him around top 10, usually hovering around top 3 to top 8. So with the artifact, the new uniform, and everything else that I upgraded, I was able to secure the number 1 spot. Keep in mind that the rank doesn't necessarily reflect how good the build is, since you can game the ranking system in some pretty ridiculous ways, but I thought it was kind of cool that I got rank 1 going for a full PvP build. Since I'm currently in Challenger Timeline and I have access to additional buffs, I decided to just use 2 random characters instead of supports and just use Thanos with his own leadership in all of the testing that I did. The first test that I did was versus a non-challenger player, but they have a good build and they have some top metas that I could test versus. I have to say that with Thanos' new uniform, he is ridiculously better and can essentially one-shot pretty much any character with his 4th skill, even with no damage proc. I'd say that his 4th is his main character takedown skill, and ironically enough, the AI prioritizes that skill over all others. The order in which I've seen the AI prioritize skills goes from 4 to 5 to 2 and then to 3. So if you have any of those skills that I mentioned in order available is when the AI will use it. Also, if you didn't happen to check the uniform's skill sheet, the 4th skill now has super guard break, and that is on the portion after he kind of does his sword attacks, where he does the beam attack at the end. That does the majority of the damage on the skill and has super guard break on it, so it will kind of head rock and keep the opponent locked down. What I find pretty funny now is that the 5th skill is a full iframe and they gave Proxima's best skill to Thanos. It has delayed damage, so even if you get kind of interrupted or killed, the 5th skill damage will persist. Not only that, but the 5th skill has a damage buff on it and has a short animation, which means that Thanos almost cancels that skill into other ones. Following the 5th skill, the AI prioritizes the 2nd skill if the opponent isn't iframing, which means that he will remove all buffs from the opponent. It's interesting that that's the case because on the old uniform, I believe that the remove all buffs effect is on the 1st skill instead. The fact that Thanos now has his own debuff leadership is pretty amazing because you can potentially run 2 supports with him and make him really difficult to take down or hard counter some teams in Timeline. The incredibly high damage mitigation, healing, and base damage that he has allows him to even take down counters that would potentially be good against him, like Spider-Man. He's actually so dominant now that I would say he's easily in the top 3 and possibly even top 2 for Timeline. Because he's so good, I decided to also do a mirror match versus him to show you how strong he is, that he can also take down himself. Now, if you're wondering what kind of build to use on him for PvP, I actually tested regen very thoroughly and also got a lot of data from testing against people with authority as well as alliance mates that had authority on the character. I want to say that I did around 25 tests with mighty CTP of regen and a brilliant CTP of regen versus various other Thanoses with the same build, as well as with the mighty and brilliant CTP of authorities. So from my findings, the things that I concluded were between a regular regen and a regular authority, the regen has an edge over the authority. Between a mighty CTP of regen and a mighty CTP of authority, the mighty CTP of regen has an edge over the mighty CTP of authority. And that's mostly due to the steal effect on the authority only going up to 30%. So the 50 and 30% with Thanos' uniform doesn't end up going to the 100% or the max value in a way to prevent all damage from coming in. However, when you compare a brilliant CTP of regen to a brilliant CTP of authority, the brilliant CTP of authority with the steal effect actually does have an edge versus the brilliant CTP of regen in Timeline at the very least, because that steal effect can go up to 60%. So if you manage to get even 50%, that means that you can essentially negate all damage that comes towards you for the 5 seconds that it is up. In addition to that, you can't be super guard broken, which is really important for Timeline, and you do have that damage accumulation, which means that the next time that you cast a skill, all that damage accumulation will almost guarantee that the next skill is pretty much a one-shot. Now, it does seem like I'm advocating for the CTP, but it does have a little bit of an edge in Timeline. However, that doesn't mean that the brilliant CTP of regen isn't that far behind it. There's also some speculation online that Thanos' healing isn't working 100% of the time when he's invincible. I haven't entirely noticed this in my testing, but I have seen that when he does take numerical damage, so a little number appears above his head, he will absolutely heal in that case. Now, even though a brilliant CTP of authority might have a little bit of an edge in Timeline, that might not be the case in content like Alliance Tournament and Alliance Conquest, since the HP modifiers are a bit different there, and you'll get a much larger HP pool and much more healing from having a higher base health. I obviously would have to test him in Alliance Conquest, which I currently can't because it's not active. But to summarize, I would say that for Timeline, if you have a brilliant CTP of authority lying around, then that probably will help you out the most. But otherwise, I think that a regen or a mighty CTP of regen might help you a little bit more, especially if you have up to, say, 70% health on your cards, or you have a lot of HP Urus and stuff stacked onto the Thanos build. If you're playing the character manually, you basically just want to spam the majority of his skills, but usually try to use your second skill if it's available, since it removes all buffs from the opponent. From there, you can basically just use your fifth when it's available to go into iframe, and if the opponent goes into any kind of skill, you can just do your 3 and cancel it into the 4th skill. If you know that you're about to take a bunch of damage, then you can go right into the 5th skill or right into the 4th skill, since both of them do have an iframe. Another helpful tip is that when Thanos uses his 4th skill, which is the iframe ignore skill, it's kind of a straight line attack for the first part, so you can dodge it by going to the left and right and then kind of moving away, allowing you to follow up with your own iframe or iframe ignore skill when his own 4th is down. If you're already having difficulty taking out some top build Thanoses in timeline, some characters that you can use are Spider-Man. He still works great even without a damage proc versus Thanos. You can also use Emma, especially if you have her artifact, because the reflect damage does a lot back to Thanos, and that's mostly because his 4th skill now doesn't have an iframe at the end of it, meaning you can also use other characters like Silver Surfer who have that reflect and will essentially make Thanos take himself out. You can also use Thanos versus himself, or even a character like Sentry. By using the 5th and 2nd skill in combination with the 4th and 3rd, you should have enough burst damage to take him out fast. I almost forgot to mention, but you can also use Warlock, especially if you have a damage proc on him, though I find that if the 2nd skill doesn't take Thanos out and you don't have a damage proc, he tends to struggle a little bit, especially because he doesn't have that super guard break on his skills like Sentry does, which can potentially allow you to lock down opponent Thanoses and take them out. Also, considering that he has penetration that goes through all sources on his 4th skill, and because his heal is dependent on getting hit, I didn't really try out a CTP of Destruction or Greed. And basically, to summarize, between a CTP of Authority and Regen, if you have a good amount of health on your cards, maybe around 60 to 70 at the very least, then I would say that a regen to a mighty CTP of regen is a little bit better in timeline. But if you have a mighty CTP of authority, it should be pretty good, almost equivalent to a mighty CTP of regen. And then if you have a brilliant CTP of authority, it should have a slight edge versus a brilliant CTP of regen in timeline at the very least. Again, I still need to test how a brilliant CTP of regen holds up in Alliance Conquest, and I would guess that it would do pretty well in Alliance Tournament, since the health modifier is even higher in that mode. So basically, if you like PvP, then I would highly recommend you picking up this uniform, and the good thing is that his artifact isn't really required, since it doesn't really do too much for him. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that Thanos is back on top. That pretty much does it for this one. I'm pretty happy how Thanos turned out, since I really like that character, and I did also fully complete my testing for Infinity Ultron, so if you're interested to see how he performs in both PvE and PvP, make sure to check that out tomorrow probably. Anyways, thanks for your time and watching, but the video is now over.